Hello, and welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we dive into Diana Wynne Jones's 1986 fantasy novel, Howl's Moving Castle. Now let's toss another log to our fire demon. We're ready for our first fantasy project.
Yeah, kind of a shift in genre here. We're going from kind of a lot more adult-centered things, and we're kind of going to more of a childish book. But I don't know. It's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, it's I would classify it as a YA fantasy in the vein of like a Harry Potter, which it's been compared to a lot, even though Harry Potter came out later. Yeah, I mean, this book has got a real charm to it, and I've been enjoying reading it. We're going to cover the first half here. I read chapters 1 through 10. That's what you read too, right?
Yep, chapters 1 through 10. And yeah, like you said, it's nice to go into something that's like a genuinely like wholesome experience, rather than having to think about like ulterior motives of characters and different things that are going on. And it's just nice it's nice.
It's a palate cleanser, right after the thing. That's what we just did. Yeah, so let's just talk for a second about our experience with Howl's Moving Castle. I have seen the movie, but I think it's probably been about 10 years, the more I think about it. And I'm realizing I don't remember it super well, although I know I've seen it at least twice.
Wow, yeah. I was going to ask you that because coming into it, I've seen the film a lot, and I think last time I saw it was about a year ago, and it's a masterpiece in my eyes. It's amazing. Miyazaki is a legend. He's incredible. But I was going to ask you because there's things in the movie that are straight from the book. So I was just wondering, going into plot points, what you were going to know, what you weren't going to know.
I guess we'll just have to address them as they come. There were certain things I was like, oh yeah, I remember this part from the movie, and then there was a lot of other stuff that I'm like, is this even in there? And I couldn't remember honestly. So we can talk about that as we go. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, this is basically what we do. We go back to the source material for an adaptation that's either out already or coming out. And we read it and talk about it in depth, and then we get to the film that gets made. So that'll be the final of our 3-episode run. I think we're planning to do with this one, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll do the first half here, and then the second half of the book next week, and then following that up with the film. Before we get into the story proper, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Diana Wynne Jones, the author. Do you know anything about her?
Almost nothing. I don't think I've ever honestly heard of her before this novel.
All right, perfect. I mean, I don't know a ton. I just did some real quick research. I found out that she was born in 1934 in London and died in 2011 at the age of 76 from lung cancer. In her college days, she attended lectures by both J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both really well-known names in fantasy. According to her autobiography, she decided she was an atheist as a child, which I thought was a pretty cool detail. I don't know why it was in her Wikipedia page, but there it was.
That's an interesting thing right there. Like that shows you the kind of person that she's gonna grow up to be, and the writer. And it's interesting because deciding that as a child, and also, I guess, attending lectures from C.S. Lewis is like, yeah, because I think he was like really heavily Christian, right? Or he used a lot of Christian allegories, or.
Yeah, Lewis was very Christian, as was Tolkien. I don't want to talk more about that because I don't feel like I know all the details, but I know they were both very Christian. I mean, I think the atheist thing is also interesting to me because I also basically decided I was an agnostic when I was in probably middle school, so very early on. I guess I'd call myself a child, so I could definitely that's really interesting to me, and it made me kind of like her more. But, to each their own. In her career, she is famous. She got really famous for a book she wrote much later called Tough Guide to Fantasyland. Have you heard of this book?
Never, no.
Yeah, so this is a book that was actually is really well respected among other writers I know, especially in the fantasy genre, because it's basically like a really hilarious satire of all the tropes that exist in like sword and sorcery epics. And I really want to read it. And I had no idea that this was the same author until I did this research, because I had heard of that book and I was like, oh, she wrote that book? I was really surprised.
I wonder what tropes she put into Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to read the book to know. It is also said that while it's like kind of a send up, it's also like a loving send up. So it's not like necessarily saying they're all terrible,
Right.
just that they're there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I really want to check it out now. Yeah, like I said before, Harry Potter is often compared to these books as maybe these being kind of an inspiration, like her writing being kind of an inspiration for J.K. Rowling. And, you know, we can talk more about it as we go, but there's a feel to this book that reminds me a lot of reading like early Harry Potter novels. It's a lot of kind of wonder and just kind of wholesome.
Right.
So Diana Wynne Jones was known for being really good friends with Neil Gaiman, so much so that they even dedicated books to each other, which I think is really just kind of cool whenever I hear something like that. And then, yeah, Howl's Moving Castle surged in popularity after Hayao Miyazaki made his 2004 anime, and the 2005 English dub version featuring like Christian Bale and everybody came out. And then after the fact, it had been lesser known, and then after that came out, it like, you know, surged in popularity.
I saw something about her winning some prestigious young adult fiction award after the film came out, so probably due to that.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so nothing real crazy to talk about here in her biography, but from all accounts, she seems like she was a pleasant British lady who had a good career, friends with other people in the world of fantasy fiction, and it seemed to be well loved.
I mean, just from what we've read so far, I would definitely read more of her material. I really enjoy it. Like I said, it's very like genuinely wholesome and like there's no cynicism involved really. Yeah, maybe the characters have a little bit of intrigue to them, a little bit of like darkness, but it's always just a fun ride.
Yeah, I mean, that's not normally the kind of thing I read. I think that's why I got into Harry Potter later and am not nearly the fan that a lot of people are for the same reason. But I think it is nice every now and then to read something like this. Like I said, as a palate cleanser almost for the types of things you're used to. It can be nice to kind of embrace the more wholesome fairy tale like fantasy out there that has a real magic to it that I do really enjoy. All right, so chapter 1, we meet Sophie Hatter, our protagonist. She is the eldest of 3 daughters for a Franny Hatter who runs a hat shop, which is kind of funny that their last name's Hatter and they run a hat shop, but I guess that was a thing in medieval times often,
Yeah.
right?
I think is Franny the mother or the stepmother? She might be a stepmother.
Oh, you're right. Stepmother to one or two of them.
Right.
Maybe the real mother of one of them. Yeah, I don't remember those exact details. But so Martha and Letty are Sophie's sisters. Letty is said to be the most beautiful. Sophie is the most studious and a reader, which I always, readers love to read about other readers. So whenever someone is described as like a really studious kind of bookworm kind of character, and it's in a book, like that's such an easy way to just appeal to the reader and be like, "Ooh, I like her. She's a reader like me."
Yeah. Or like the Stephen King writer thing when he like puts writers in his novels.
Yeah, it's probably kind of similar. Although writers a little different because you can get into a lot of meta stuff whenever you have writers in there. But yeah, reader's a easy shorthand for you can identify with this character.
Yeah.
So Letty, the most beautiful, really wants to marry a prince, but Martha says she's going to end up rich without marrying anybody. And we get a lot of talk about like sisters and how they fit in the order and how their lives are going to play out. And it seems like Franny has a plan for all of them.
Well, it's funny because like they talk about Sophie being the oldest, and they have some sort of the oldest always has bad luck and they're doomed to failure and stuff. And being the oldest, I was like, what? I was like, this is news to me.
I'm the middleist, so one of the middleist, I should say, in my family. So I don't know. I guess that makes me a Martha. Speaking of that, Franny has a plan. We hear talk about the Witch of the Waste, who has been threatening the king. We hear about the wizard Solomon, who went to deal with the witch and I think has disappeared. And we hear talk about a tall castle that has appeared near town, making people think the witch has come out of the swamp. And the castle moves around on its own, blows smoke out of its turrets. And then we learned that belongs to Wizard Howl. And this is the first we also hear of the rumors that Howl is said to suck the souls from young girls and et their hearts. It's a very British thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a few times that I was like, is that the correct wording? And I was like, it's probably just like a color thing. British color.
Yeah.
It's just spelled a little differently, or they say something a little bit differently.
He's said to eat their hearts.
Right.
Yeah. Which is kind of a scary thought, but that's the rumor. And Sophie is, a little bit scared of this Howl when she hears that. So we learned that Mr. Hatter then dies unexpectedly, and the hat shop is left with considerable debts. Oh, it's Fanny, not Franny. I've been saying Franny the whole time.
Were you saying Franny?
Yeah, I think I was.
Oh, I thought I heard Fanny.
Well, it's Fanny. And she has a plan for the girls to help her offset these debts that the hat shop has incurred. And her plans are basically this. Letty is going to go to a pastry shop and be an apprentice to learn to bake and stuff. And Martha is to go stay with a woman who talks a lot, a witch with a lovely house named Mrs. Fairfax. Sophie, on the other hand, is going to inherit the hat shop when Fanny retires. And for now, she's going to stay on as Fanny's apprentice. I'll quickly go over what happens next, but basically the three daughters leave to go to their respective apprenticeships, and Sophie stays on and is going to work with Fanny. I believe this is something that's directly in the movie, right? I remember this happening.
I think it's definitely there. So I can't remember for sure, but I don't know that there's two sisters in the movie. There's something with the sisters.
The hat shop thing.
The hat shop thing is definitely, yeah. And then so she also gets lonely over time because some time passes, and she talks to her hats as she's embroidering them and stitching them, and she kind of names them and gives them powers, I guess, is what I kind of got out of it. Did you see any of that?
Yeah, she starts doing that here, right? She's kind of giving them names and backstories and compliments and so forth. So we learned that the king has quarreled with his brother who's a prince, and that the prince left. Then May Day arrives, which is a big festival or something, and a lot of people are celebrating outside, and she sees Wizard Howl's castle is shooting off fireworks, almost in celebration of this event. But she's frightened by it, and she seems very timid in this early chapter. She's very everything scares her and frightens her, and she's just very reserved. And then there was a line here that I think is an emblematic line of the kind of prose that Diana Wynne-Jones uses that I thought was really interesting. So this is just description. She says, "Crowds of young men swaggered beerily to and fro." And there's a musicality to those words that mimics the thing that she's describing. And that's a really good sign of someone who's using poetic language in a really interesting way. Neil Gaiman does this sort of thing also very well. And so this is something that reminded me of him, and something that I do really like that she does and she continues to do in this novel. So a young man accosts Sophie and wants to buy her a drink. He offers to go with her to see her sister, but she refuses and then leaves. And then she arrives at the pastry shop. Now the man is a very striking. This is our first time we meet Howl, right? But we don't know it's Howl. Right.
Or she doesn't know. We kind of assume it's something important because it kind of is thrown in there with flamboyant garb and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't quite. It seemed like he was important, but I didn't think it was Howl because I didn't remember from the movie exactly what he looked like or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so he kind of flirts with her. It's written in very kind ways, but that's essentially what he's doing. Letty then goes into this pastry shop to meet up with her sister and finds that instead of it being Letty, it's Martha. But Martha looks just like Letty. And we learned that there's been a spell cast.
Yeah, it becomes kind of complicated here.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the intro to this book, and it's very kind of domestic. We learn that about some magic in the world, but it's there's not a lot of stakes, at least early on here.
I think it's interesting with the magic being so commonplace that like if my stepmother told me I was going to inherit a hat shop rather than going to apprentice with a witch or a wizard or somebody, I would be pretty upset.
Yeah, that's a sour deal. But Sophie actually like seems to be fine with it. Like she's not really resisting anything at this point. And it seems like she's dutiful, and she feels like she's doing the family well by staying and working as a hatter at this point.
It's funny because she's like, I think that has something to do with like her being timid, like you're saying, like she just wants to do right by everybody, and she's like doesn't want to upset anybody. But then at the same time, she also thinks really ill of herself with the whole eldest person not being successful, or they're doomed to fail, and she kind of has this pessimistic outlook while also being timid and reserved.
Yeah, I also got a lot of implications that it was kind of societal. Like that's how all eldest children are. You know what I mean? Like they have like these like preordained roles in their society that to me strikes me as very traditional, old school kind of way of thinking. Which I suppose this is kind of a medieval society, so I suppose it makes sense. So Martha admits that what happened was her and Letty decided they didn't like what they were doing. Letty wants to go learn from the witch. Even though she's the most beautiful, she'd rather go learn magic. Whereas Martha would rather come and do this pastry shop. So they learned about this spell from the witch, and they used it to make Martha appear the same as Letty. But we also learned that over time she's going to slowly start reverting back to her other self. But it's not like her other self is like hideous or anything, so it's going to be kind of a subtle transformation. So Martha then says that she feels sorry for Sophie because she's stuck in the hat shop, and she says, I think, oh, look, now I started writing Franny. Is it Franny or Fanny?
Fanny, no R.
Okay, so I started writing Franny at this point, so I was mistaken. So Fanny, Martha says she thinks Fanny is manipulating Sophie. And she says, "Is she paying you?" And Sophie's like, "No." And so she says, "Well, she's making you do all the work while she's off, having fun and just kind of making money off of your labors." And this is kind of like a wake up call to Sophie, who hadn't really thought this way until now. So then Sophie slips off and goes back to the hat shop, thinks over what Martha said, and then she decides she's going to ask Fanny for a wage. When she does, Fanny says, "Oh yeah, we'll see about that." And Fanny feels like, "Oh, okay, I feel kind of mean for even mentioning it, but it seems like it's going to be all taken care of now." But then sure enough, Fanny never does anything. Like later, just never does anything again, and Sophie is not the kind to keep bringing it up, because like I said, she's very timid at this point. And so she doesn't say anything.
But it does seem to, it bothers her. She thinks about it a lot, about how
it does bother her, yeah.
Starting to tick away at her sanity or something.
Yeah, and this is at the point where the Witch of the Waste comes in as a customer into the hat shop, and she's with this man whose name's Gaston, and he seems to be like some sort of assistant. And she comes in, and she's this really like kind of impressive, beautiful lady, and she's like asking after like hats, and Sophie tries to find like the best one they have for her, but of course it's not even close to good enough. She says, "Well, why did you even come here?" And the witch says that she'd heard of the Hatter, and I don't know. So she had heard of her and was somehow threatened by her being there. I was unsure as to what. Can you clarify?
She didn't want any competition, but also, so did you? Because
the hats were so good, right?
The hats were like, yeah, they were like at least different and like new or something. They were just like some sort of competition in the area. So when this was
like maybe there was a mystery though, like why she was really there was maybe not being said.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna get at. What do you think about? So did Sophie? Because it seemed like she was kind of frustrated with her situation. Do you think that she snapped on the witch, or do you think that the witch kind of just out of like jealousy of her success or like the hats? Like, what did you think happened here? Why did the witch do what she did next?
Oh, yeah, the curse. I felt like she was there to curse her.
She was going to do that for whatever, regardless.
I thought so, but like I said, I was a little unsure as to the motives here, so I'm certainly could be wrong.
I feel like I read in the film there's a motive and or less of a motive, I guess, but and it's kind of more mysterious. And then in this, I almost felt like it was because she kind of got aggravated with her, and she's like, "Why did you even come here then?" Like,
Oh, because she gave her attitude.
yeah, if you were looking for such fancy hats, why did you even come to this shop? We're just a small shop.
So yeah, so she during their little argument they have at some point, Sophie realizes she's kind of croaking in her response, and a spell has been cast on her, like without her even knowing it, and the spell makes her old, transforms her into an old crone. And we do get her saying that it's for meddling in her matters, like her witches' matters. So I'm not really sure what that means, or how Sophie did that, I should say. But that's the reason we're given, and then the Witch of the Waste kind of just leaves her as an old woman and just heads out of the shop. So Sophie takes this like a champ. She is like, it doesn't seem to bother her at all. She's like, okay, I'm old now. I always felt like I was old at heart, so it makes sense.
I feel like it had something to do with her becoming old. Like as an older person, they're implying that like you don't care about stuff as much. So like since she was old, she was just like, well, I'm old, so what are you gonna do about it?
There's some implication that, yeah, the fact that she is old, like, actually affects her mood. She has more of the mood of an older lady. But we do also get, like, something in the following day where she says that she was in shock, and that's maybe why she wasn't as, like, upset about it. But this first day, she just says, okay, well, I don't need to stay here anymore if I'm an old lady, so I'm just gonna leave. And she just, like, sets off to like find her fortune and takes off down the road. Her back starts aching as she's walking, and she finds this old scarecrow, sits it upright, has this like thought of like, oh, what if you could talk to me and be my companion or whatever. And then she just leaves it, and she like finds a dog. There's this whole thing with her and this dog that she frees, and then
well, yeah, she like. I think she like stands the scarecrow up. She like stands him up better. So and she's like, maybe if somebody sees you on their way, they'll put you where you need to be, or something. And she kind of helped. The dog was like tied up.
Yeah, the dog was trapped by the scarecrow's stick. It all kind of happens at the same time. Yeah, and I think it's tied to a walking stick.
Yeah, it's a walking stick.
Multiple sticks early on. A lot of talk about sticks, but she eventually gets a walking stick. And she is like fully old lady mode now. She's like being, chatty with everybody. She encounters a shepherd and like has a conversation with him where she's being funny. Like, I don't know. I really like her as an old lady. Like, she's instantly a character that I'm more interested in at this point.
I like her. I think she, like, in the book, it seems like I guess it's just up to interpretation, because in the film, I feel like she's more of a young woman trapped in an older body, but at the same time, I don't know. It just seems like in this, she like became an old woman, and then in the film, for the most part, I kind of always like was like, oh, it's a young woman in an older body, and in this, she was like actually an old woman.
Yeah, well, here she says like she doesn't feel scared being out at night. She doesn't think anyone's gonna bother her. She doesn't even think that wolves would eat her because she's too dry and tough. She just doesn't care anymore after being so timid and like, as her younger self. She just doesn't care at this point. And she sees Wizard Howl's castle coming towards her, and so she just yells at it to stop, and then it does. And that's the end of chapter 2.
There's something about like some sort of theme of with age comes wisdom or confidence or something in here, where it's like, because she was so timid before, I guess the lesson here would be kind of be confident, have confidence in yourself, and kind of be who you are, and that as you age, you'll kind of get more of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I definitely see that as a theme of. It's almost, that's why this makes for good fantasy material, because you're getting someone who has kind of the scrappiness of like an old tough woman who's seen a lot and has been around the block and just doesn't care what people think of her anymore, and isn't tied down by trying to be proper or be beautiful and all that stuff, right? Like, there's a freedom almost in that. And at the same time, she has all this youthful, vibrancy and verve for life that maybe a real old woman wouldn't have. So it makes her a really good fantasy character because it's a really interesting blend of those two things. And then you also, of course, get the idea of a beautiful young woman who is now in this old body, and so what that does for her self-image and everything, right? So chapter 3, Sophie finds her way into the castle by having to do all kinds of anti-clockwise walking and invisible walls and all this stuff, but it's kind of a maze to get in, but she does eventually get inside the castle. And when she gets inside, she comes into this like workshop lounge area, and she finds a young man. She sees all these like wizardly things everywhere and a small fire in the hearth. And she just sits down at the hearth on the chair because she's exhausted at this point, and just decides she's gonna basically have a nap. And the boy, whose name's Michael, we found, says he's Howl's apprentice and that the wizard Howl isn't home right now. And he's very like kind of put off by her just showing up, but she just doesn't care. Like she just doesn't care about anything. And she's like, I'm gonna take a nap. You wake me up when Howl comes home. And then she falls asleep in front of the fire. As she's like half asleep, she's kind of studying Michael and kind of seeing what's up with him. And I wasn't really quite sure of his age, but later I think it's revealed he's 15. So he's a teen, and he's there, and she kind of is curious about him, but she's kind of pretending to be fully asleep. And then she ends up falling fully asleep. And while she's asleep, this is the first time that the POV shifts, which I don't know if you noticed this when it happened, but as a writer, I'm like, oh, interesting, because she falls asleep, and if we're really close to her POV, we shouldn't know anything that happens when she falls asleep. But instead of that happening, she falls asleep, and we know that Michael walks over and starts talking to the fireplace, or to the fire in the fireplace, which talks back to him. While he's doing that, Sophie's asleep, and then she wakes herself up snoring. She notices that the fire has gotten really low, and she throws this log on, and the flames go blue and green and light up, and she thinks, oh, there must be salt in the wood. And as she's staring into the flames, she imagines a face. And sure enough, the fire speaks to her, and we meet Calcifer, the fire demon.
Who is my favorite character.
He's amazing.
I mean, he's up there
Calcifer
for sure. I like Howl a lot, and I like Sophie, but I think Calcifer is just like the part of the story. He's the comedic relief while also being like really cool, and he just says whatever he wants. He's like a little fire demon, and I like the whole curse thing.
Yeah, which was kind of a mystery, and I don't remember all the details of, so don't spoil it for me. But yeah, so she enters into an agreement with him that he's gonna like let her stay if she can help him get free of this contract or something he has with Howl, where he has to be the like engine that runs this castle. And part of this agreement keeps him stuck in this hearth. Yeah. And so he doesn't like it, and he wants her to help him find a way out. In exchange, he's going to not only let her stay, but also lift her curse. Part of this, the demon says she's going to have to stay around because he also, part of his thing is he can't say what the curse is that binds him to Howl. Like, he can't talk about it.
I think it's
and
the similarly,
same for her. She can't mention the curse that's on her. So that's an interesting part of the magic, is like you can't talk about the fact that the spell's been cast on you, which is an effective thing to put on a curse, I guess. And yeah, so the reality that she's going to die about 60 years sooner than she was going to die seems to be kind of the thing that turns her around to not liking this curse. Like, she's okay being in an old woman's body, but she doesn't want to die soon, which is essentially what is going to happen to her. I did want to talk about, this is a good place, I think, to stop and just mention that the magic in this world is just really cool. Like, it's a really well thought through. It has like interesting rules to it, while at the same time feeling like it has no rules. The idea of a fire demon being the energy that like powers this moving castle, I don't know. I was really taken with how imaginative it is, and impressed with it, really.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll talk more about the magic when we get to another magical thing that happens in another chapter. Okay. All right, so chapter 4 comes around with Sophie waking up and thinking she's dreamed the demon, the fire demon. She doesn't even think that it happened. She looks out the window and sees a town by the sea. She finds the room and the work area. It's now lit up, and she can see that everything's really dirty and dusty.
She goes into a bathroom, finds it disgusting and dirty. She looks up into a loft, and basically everything's dirty. She goes out to a backyard. We see higgledy-piggledy heaps of wire. This is another example, I think, of the way she writes that I think is really interesting. Like, it just gives like a character to that heap of metal or whatever that she's seeing, you know? And she finds that really bizarre, like it doesn't really fit with the rest of the castle. And then there's another door that leads to a broom closet that, you know, pointedly has a pair of cloaks in it, which in any fantasy story with magic, I'm immediately like, ooh, what kind of magic cloaks are in this broom closet? And then she adds some logs to the fire and finds out that the fire demon is real. And he kind of wakes up, and Calcifer reminds her of the deal that they made.
So something I wanted to mention here was she came through a doorway, and when she looks out the window, she's looking at a window and a doorway at the same wall, and she's seeing like two different locations, I think, in that way. So this is our first instance of it there being like some sort of portals or something leading to different towns inside of the castle.
I should say that I'm not 100% clear on how the portal doors work. I know there is one door that has like a knob that seems to open to different places. But then there is also like seems to be a door that consistently leads to like a location in a town where this house really is. But then also a door that just leads to the outside of wherever the moving castle is.
Yeah, it might be the same. I think the door with the knob that you twist to a different color, I think that's the same as leading to it. Like, I think there's 3 doorways. There's 4 slots on the knob that you turn, and I think 3 of those 4 lead consistently to locations, like you were saying. But maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. That sounds right.
And then there's also the exit to wherever the castle currently is, and then there's the 4th dial that's black. That if you turn to, we find out later there's some mysteriousness going on with that.
Yeah. So at this point, Michael wakes up, comes down, offers her food. She says that she can cook, which Michael tells her only Hal's been able to do. So she decides to compel Calcifer to let her cook on him, which is something that Hal is very impressed with because he shows up basically right then and for the first time, and he's super impressed with her ability to get Calcifer to obey her and let her cook. And of course, this is she recognizes him from the Mayday Fair, right?
She recognizes him, and he like vaguely remembers her, but doesn't know where he knew her from. Yeah, and right. Also the cooking on Calcifer is a big deal because even the apprentice Michael can't get Calcifer to like allow him to do that. Yeah.
So he's really impressed with her ability to like cow this fire demon, who later at one point says that he's millions of years old. I don't know if you got that, but I was like, oh, that's a lot. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. It's obviously because he wants the curse to be broken. That's why she's like able to manipulate him.
But I mean, we also get like an implication that he is very powerful.
Right.
From that to me, that says that to me. He's able to make this whole moving castle run. And then he's also millions of years old and a fire demon. Yeah. I don't know. He seems like even though he's kind of small and kind of cute in this moment, it kind of tells me that he's got a lot of power too.
Well, what's funny is that I think you as well. We think of the Miyazaki Calcifer, the little tiny cute guy, but in this, he's like little small orange and red. Sometimes he turns blue, but in this, Calcifer is like a full blown demon. He has like purple teeth and blue hair, and like he looks like more demonic.
Yeah, I agree. He looks a little more intense, but he's still like the way he talks is still kind of comical. Although you're right, it's not as much as it is in the movie. But he's small, I think is what it is. Like he's in like they put the frying pan on his head, and he starts like mumbling when it's on his head and stuff. So there's some like funny kind of cute stuff that happens with him still, even in the book.
I think he also like grows to really like Sophie. So that's another part of it. Like I was saying, like she's able to manipulate him because of the contract, but at the same time, I feel like eventually he grows to like her.
Well, this is another example of how different she is now. Like she's bullying this fire demon to like do her bidding, and like she's not taking any guff from Michael. And when Howl comes in, she's like, has no problem kind of talking to him and standing up to him and acting like she belongs there. And this is all like her becoming this old lady really just gave her all this backbone, which is funny because now her back hurts all the time. But yeah, it really transformed her character in a really fascinating way.
Agreed.
She offers Hal to. She says, take me on for a month as a trial, and I'll be your cleaning lady. And he says, okay, or he doesn't say okay, but he just basically agrees to it. She mentioned something about the castle, and they all laugh because, come to find out, it's not really a castle. It's more like a house that's got like a illusion of being a castle cast upon it. It's really interesting, like how this magic all works. So while they're talking, someone knocks at the door, and Hal opens it with the red blob downward. And there's a man there who's asking, who's got payment for some boots that Hal made for him. And this is our first time we learn that essentially Hal makes his money by making spells and maybe making magic items and selling them to people in different townships in the area. And this is how he makes his fortune.
Yeah.
And affords his fancy clothes that he wears. And we also learn that Michael is kind of concerned about Hal having all this money that this man gives him. So this is also our first, that we learn a little bit about Hal, that he seems to be very confident. He's very good looking, kind of dashing young man, but he also seems to be extremely vain. I'm really kind of obsessed with his own looks and making, he's kind of almost like a, I don't know, somebody out of the 80s or something when I think about it, like this, lead singer of a band who's just really obsessed with having his hair just right and making all the ladies love him,
Yeah, he's he's this powerful wizard, and at the same time, he every vice that one can have, he has. He's a womanizer. He will spend all of his money. That's the character that he is.
All right, so chapter 5, Sophie starts cleaning the rooms. She is really thorough and methodical, and we get a lot of talk about her going around and cleaning cobwebs, and Hal comes out and says, you can clean the cobwebs, but don't disturb the spiders because they eat the flies, and so there's kind of a defense of the spiders. She's forbid to kill any of them. And this kind of becomes a theme of her pushing against the status quo that has come up in this place, and then him kind of giving her boundaries about what she can and can't do. Michael and Calcifer are really not happy with the cleaning. Both complain about it, and she's making stuff rain down on their heads and stuff, which annoys them. Hal eventually comes home and he's complaining about some woman, which we don't know the details of, but the whole time Sophie keeps thinking she's gonna find a box that's full of hearts that have been eaten, or souls in a container, and so she keeps thinking that these rumors are true and that she's gonna stumble upon the proof of them. So she spends the next few days looking for these things and also looking for clues about maybe the contract with Calcifer, and not really finding anything. She cleans everything. She finds that in Michael's room, he has this little box. She comes in right as he's looking at it, and it appears to be some memento from a woman he knows. So she's oh, he has a sweetie or something. And then she starts painting, and then this is the first time that Hal even notices, apparently. He comes in and goes, oh, it looks brighter in here. And this first time he's remarked upon the fact that she's been cleaning everything. And then she tries to go up into his room, and he just appears out of nowhere after she thought he wasn't there, and he's in the door frame, and he's not coming in here. I like it the way it is. It basically forbids her from coming in, she thinks, oh, this is where he's hiding the, all the hearts or whatever. But yeah, he forbids her to go in, and so she does not go in. And she's starting to feel very useless in this moment, because she's basically cleaned everything she can, and he doesn't need her to repair anything. So she kind of doesn't know what her place is, and she keeps thinking well, he's gonna make me leave.
Up to this point, she had thought that Hal was kind of a faker, and Calcifer and Michael were the ones who were doing all the magic, and then once he starts appearing all over the place and kind of displaying magic, she's oh, I was wrong. He's pretty powerful.
Yeah, he does a few things that impress her, and she goes, oh, okay, this wizard is legit. Yeah, and I mean, you do kind of feel like she's running out of things to do to be useful here, so you kind of understand why she's maybe a little bit concerned about it, right? Yeah,
and at the same time, she's still trying to find out how she can free Calcifer. So she's got to find excuses for her to stay around, and she feels as soon as all the stuff that she has to complete is completed, then she's going to get kicked out. And it's funny because Michael starts talking about how you kind of just show up at Howl's place and hang out, and then eventually he just gets used to you being there, and then you live there.
Yeah, and that seems to be happening for them here. All right, so for chapter 6, Howl leaves for a few days, then comes back. She mentions that he's kind of a slitherer outer, which is a interesting phrase, for the fact that he doesn't like being pinned down by things. He doesn't like for people to compel him to do things, and basically he's stubborn, which is something going forward that continues to be true. And so she watches Howl craft a spell, which I think is a really kind of interesting part, where we see that that's something he can do, and he's doing it with Michael watching, to try and teach him kind of how to do it. And while that's happening, a messenger knocks on the door, and we learn that the king wants Howl to help get their wagons out of like the marshlands, and Howl agrees to do it. And Sophie this whole time is kind of listening and thinking like, oh, maybe I could pick up like some magical knowledge, which I'm like, yes, this is what I would do for sure. You know what I mean? If there's a lesson going on about magic, I'm like, ears perked up, I'm listening.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. And like, it's funny because the magic, like you were saying before, the magic in this novel is really interesting because seemingly you can craft a spell and or use magical powders and artifacts, I guess, and kind of give them over to non-magical folk, and they can use those spells later at a later date.
Yeah, there's these like scrolls that seem to have these like. I later on it becomes more apparent, but at this point I didn't quite understand it. But it seems like they're kind of instructions that are riddles. They're like riddles for like how they work, and you have to figure out what the spell is asking for as far as components, and like almost answer the riddle in order to like create the spell, which I don't know, it's pretty cool kind of magical system here. So Hal sends Michael to the palace with the new spell that he made and instructions for how to tell them how it works. And then Hal like leaves with his guitar, and Calcifer says that he gave her a hint about the contract already, but she says, you know, she missed it, I guess. And this is when Sophie gets curious and decides she's going to see what's through that door. So she goes up, turns the knob to black, and opens the door and sees nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Like it's not white, it's not gray, it's not black. There's no color, which immediately is like, all right, now I've got like a brain aneurysm. So I'm trying to figure out what no color looks like. Yeah. It's not black, white, or gray. Have fun trying to picture that.
I did the same thing. I was like, all right, come on, you can figure it out. And I was like in my mind trying to imagine it.
Yeah, and she like pokes it, and then of course, because that's how she is. Yeah. And then like there's like, oh, I guess not, and then she just closes it.
Well, yeah, and even Calcifer doesn't recognize what it is.
Yeah, he's like peeking out of the hearth, like, what do you see? You know, he's like curious about it. We don't know. I mean, in this moment, it's not told to us, but later we find out that maybe like a spell came through when she had the door open, which is mysterious. We'll get to that. At that point, Michael returns, and he seems kind of upset that Hal's out with women, and this is when he starts to talk about Hal, and he says Hal keeps falling in love with all these different women, and Sophie is upset, saying, you know, because she keeps thinking that he's eating their hearts or whatever, and he's like, how can you be okay with this? And they laugh and come to find out that Michael has been spreading these rumors in these different towns, and that's how she heard these rumors. And it's a way to, like, quote, blacken his name. And I think it's Michael trying to, like, protect the women of these towns, maybe? I don't know. It's kind of messed up when you think about it. Yeah. But essentially, like, he knows that Hal falls in love with women, and then the women, as long as the women don't love him back, he's obsessed. But as soon as the women decide they love him back, he loses interest. Which, I don't know, that does not make me like Hal very much. He kind of seems like a jerk. Yeah. But it's kind of, I guess, charming in a way. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like this kind of interesting character trait, I guess, that he has, that he like kind of goes around. Yeah, it's a flaw, I guess. Character flaw, yeah, that's true. He kind of goes around and makes these women. It's just, and what does that say about his character, that he must hate himself, right? It's like he loves himself so much and he's so vain, but he must hate himself because as soon as they love him back, he's like not interested. And
yeah, it's like if someone can love him, then that somehow lessens them in his eyes, because yeah, like you said, maybe he's got like some real like self-loathing or something. He also seems to enjoy the process of like courting these like women and making them fall in love. So he seems to be really, I don't know, he's a womanizer, you know, like this is like a fancy way of talking about people who really do this sort of thing. Right. But this is all news to Sophie, who thought this was all real. And she learns that this is all instead rumors, so it was spread by Michael, and she feels kind of silly. And then Howl comes home, and he goes into the bathroom, and he's like, "Oh, I hope you didn't move any of the spells in here." And she's like, "No, I didn't. Of course not." Lying, which is not the first time we've like. And Sophie actually lies a lot in this book, which I think is pretty funny. I don't know. It's not like necessarily. It's a lot of like white lies or like lies that don't seem very bad, in the moment. But she lies a lot, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Some of them have consequences as well, like this.
Yeah, so he comes out later and he's like flipping out, and come to find out his hair is tinged red and just very, very slight red. And she's like, "Oh, I think it looks good." But he has this like epic meltdown where he starts howling and like spirits get summoned or something. It's very confusing. And her and Michael have to flee the castle, and they go to town, and like the whole town is like getting deafened by these like screams. And this also is like a sign for how powerful he is, right? Like it shows us how powerful a wizard he is. And so they all flee to like the ocean side and like wait it out until he stops screaming. And then he finally stops screaming. They return to the castle and they find him covered in this green goo. He's had this big like tantrum, and she pushes him in the bathroom and they wash him off. They sit down afterwards and she says, "Oh, what's this all about?" And he says, "Well, I'm upset about, this girl named Sophie Hatter." And that's where this chapter ends, and kind of the cliffhanger that we now know that her sister is the one that Hal is currently infatuated with.
Yeah, which we get to see played out interestingly, because we know from before the sisters kind of swapped places, Letty and Martha.
Yeah, so I didn't even think about that, but yeah, in that moment, I guess we don't know, because it could be Martha, it could be Letty, because we know that Martha looks like Letty right now.
Right, there's like some spells going on.
And is basically acting like she is Letty. All right, well, I think this is a good time before we get any further to take a moment to talk about Audible. We have an Audible affiliate link, which is audibletrial.com/ink2film. You go there and you're going to get a free credit and a free 30 days. And you can download any audiobook from their giant list of audiobooks they have.
Yeah. Actually, I think you did this as well. I listened to the audiobook of Howl's Moving Castle for this project that we're doing here, and it's a really good experience. I mean, it's the first time I've listened to an audiobook from Audible that had a female narrator, which is a lot of fun.
Really?
Yeah, and she does a great job. And it's just it's fun and interesting to hear somebody kind of act out the scenarios that are going on with different voices. And because I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily use different voices in my own head when I'm reading.
No, I mean, it is kind of fun. And I don't know if she is a British lady, but she seems like she is, because she's got this really good like British accent, which really works for this kind of story. And it definitely adds something to the experience. I like it because I can take notes. And essentially that's just a sign, like you can multitask while you listen to a book, which I think is a really cool thing with Audible. I also wanted to mention, for my recommendation this week, Neil Gaiman, who was friends with Diana Wynne Jones. He has a book called The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which if you like this book, I think you should check that out, because it's a really interesting look at like children in England, and there's like secret magic and the kind of like a fairy world, and I don't know, it's just really cool, and his writing is really beautiful and lyrical, and these two writers remind me of each other.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out because I haven't read that, and I do like Neil Gaiman, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, and if you want to do that, make sure you go to audibletrial.com/ink2film. That way you can get it for free, and you can help us out. All right, let's get into chapter 7. Sophie is worried about Martha, and she basically doesn't want her sister to get hurt by Howl, who's this womanizer, right? And today, Howl is like in a much better mood, and he's decided he likes the hair now. He thinks it looks good with the new suit that she's made. And he leaves for the palace. He occasionally keeps going to the palace, and we know there's something going on there that we're not getting all the details of.
Did you draw anything from that yet? Because I know how, kind of knowing how the film plays out, there might be something there.
See, that's some of the stuff I don't remember. I don't remember exactly what goes on with the palace.
Okay.
So I'll be interested to see that in the second half. Everybody leaves. Michael heads out. Howl leaves. And Calcifer says, I'll open the door for you when you leave, when you come back. And she seems like she's kind of ready to... She's not even sure she wants to come back at this point because she's upset with Howl for how he's treating women. And she just doesn't know if she wants to be here anymore. And when she goes to leave, there's a scarecrow at the door, which totally scares her. And basically, she commands Calcifer to get the castle and run away from the scarecrow. And so they do that, and Calcifer expends all of his energy until he's super tired and essentially falls asleep. And they finally get all the way away from the scarecrow so they can't see it anymore. And that's when Hal and Michael return. And Michael first, and he says that Letty loves me, and he's all happy about that, right? And this is another moment of holy crap. So apparently Michael is also involved with Letty. And we also know that Letty has said something about another man. So it's creating this almost weird love triangle, we think, perhaps. I don't know. What did you think of all this? Did it seem like they were did it seem almost too convenient that they're all getting involved with a woman named Letty?
Yeah, this doesn't take place in the film. And it's interesting because, like you say, to have the apprentice in love, he's truly in love with Letty. And then he's having to hear his master go off and talk to a Letty as well. Same full name too. Yeah. Letty Hatter.
Letty Hatter, yeah.
He's bummed out at first, and then he goes to visit his Michael goes to visit his Letty. Come to find out, he's like, my Letty's never met Hal. So then we're like, okay, so somebody's using a false name, or the spell hasn't worn off with there's potentially two Lettys.
Yeah, and we kind of assume that, maybe that's what happened. He's talking to the real Letty, but how does he know that she's the real one? We don't know. So that's a mystery for Sophie to try and figure out. Hal returns. We hear some talk about the king wanting to pin him down and name him royal magician and force him to help with the witch in the waste and all this stuff, but he doesn't want to do that. Hal's really against this idea, and this goes back to his stubborn streak of not wanting to be pinned down. And this is the first time where he says, you know what, I would love, he wants Sophie to go to the king and blacken his name to the king, which is, I guess, a way him saying, go and talk bad about him so that the king won't want to work with him anymore. Yeah,
but it's interesting because at the same time, I don't know if it's here or a little bit later, but he kind of wants her to toe the line of he wants a little bit of work from the king so he can make money, but he doesn't want to be royally appointed, so he's obligated to do every little thing that the king wants.
Yeah, which to me makes it seem like he's asking the impossible from Sophie here. But Sophie doesn't, I don't think she says no or yes at this point. It's just something he kind of talks about, and she doesn't say anything. So chapter 8, Hal is happy to see that Calcifer is okay when the next day, because he was so drained from what he did for moving the castle away from the scarecrow.
And something I wanted to mention about the scarecrow before we lose that is the scarecrow is a delightfully fun character in the film, but for some reason in the novel so far he's a nightmare creature who keeps popping up and attacking them and stuff.
Yeah, and Sophie's terrified of him, right? She keeps having heart palpitations every time she sees him.
Yeah, so that's a little different than the film.
Yeah. So speaking of, Hal opens the door basically to leave, and the scarecrow is right there, play scary music. And Hal basically has to tussle with the thing. He forces it outside, and they go down, and he's like, you gotta leave, and the scarecrow shakes its head no. And then so he blasts it away with some sort of spell, that sends it into like almost a cartoony like speck in the sky, and then it like disappears.
Yeah, basically the Scarecrow blasts off again, like Team Rocket. So into the clouds. Bing!
Yes, just like that. So after that, Hal apologizes for doubting her. Sophie's having like heart issues because she was so scared. And Calcifer and Hal have this moment, like mysterious moment, where they kind of look at each other and then do something, maybe a spell, I don't know. And then Sophie starts feeling better, and then Hal wants her to rest. So next, Sophie wants to go talk to Letty, essentially. So she's going to try. She tries to sneak out. Michael catches her. They just agree to go together. They're going to use something called the 7 League Boots, and we have kind of a fun magic moment where they're, trying to like take one step because it's going to make them go a certain distance. But she keeps messing up and like stumbling, and every time she stumbles, she like transports another 10 leagues or whatever. And so they have this thing where they pop all around, zipping all around, but finally they end up where they're supposed to go.
I love that scene too, because that's a really fun scene. She's zipping all over the place, and she can't like plant her foot because she's so old, and so she keeps like accidentally stumbling and shooting another like 10 miles or whatever it is, and she keeps like
landing in cow pats, right?
Yeah, cow pats. That's another funny British thing. Cow pats.
Yeah. There's another so then they go to Fairfax's farm or whatever, or house or whatever, for Sophie to meet with Letty. And when they get there, the dog comes running out and starts running around. And this is another moment of prose that just caught my eye, because she says, there was a minute or so of helter-skelter chase in which the dog ran hither and thither in a distressed way. And those like little paired words are so musical to me.
Definitely.
That it kind of gives you this like farcical feeling for what this chase is like, right?
Right.
And during this chase, they come upon Hal and Letty in a grove. Sophie peeks out and sees them, and basically sees that Letty doesn't look like a Martha at all. She just looks like Letty now. So she was supposed to be imitating Martha, but isn't. This is how both of them can be Letty Hatter, right? Because the real Letty is not doing the assumed name thing. Sophie has a conversation with Mrs. Fairfax where she says, "Did you know that her suitor is Wizard Howl?" And Fairfax is like, "Yeah, I knew that. No big deal. I've known him from before. He was like a tutor of my mentor back in the day or something." And basically she thinks that it's like a good get, and that Letty should be happy to be being pursued by him because she could learn magic from him. Which is another like moment where I thought it was a little bit old fashioned and kind of, I don't want to call it like squicky, but it's a little bit squicky because the implication being that Letty should be okay with like trading her like affections for knowledge from Hal, which I'm not real comfortable with the way that's outlined as being like a positive thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably just this was written in the 80s.
Supposed to be
it's a different time.
It's also supposed to take place in a different, even earlier than the 80s. So it's like,
that's true. It's just, I would have expected maybe Sophie or somebody to maybe like call it out as being a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Instead, it's kind of taken to be like, oh yeah, of course, right?
Yeah. Well, Miss Fairfax is also like a bit eccentrically weird, and like maybe she's not the opinion to trust. Maybe she just feels that way, and I don't know. It definitely seems a little problematic.
Yeah, but this whole book does seem to be, or at least the part we've read, it seems to be like starting from a place of really conservative values and really traditional values, and then slowly kind of breaking them a little bit, right? But not just like blowing them up, detonating them, but like finding ways to subvert them in subtle ways, right? Which I like.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, so they head back. Someone's banging at the door. Come to find out it's the sea captain, and he's demanding a spell. Get into chapter 9. Michael gives it to him. And this is where Michael gives his backstory. And he tells Sophie how he came to stay with Hal, that he was an orphan, and that Hal took him in, basically, and he tried to make himself useful. And it's actually kind of similar to how Sophie ended up there, right? Like, it's a similar kind of thing where it seems like Howl is okay with taking on these like runaways or strays or whatever as people, and like kind of they become his friends, and he seems to like the attention maybe. And they start working together on this spell that was a spell of power that Howl supposedly left for Michael, but we learn later is not actually the correct spell. So they're working on this spell, and this is another thing where it's like there's like this verse written of like rhyming words, and it seems to be kind of a riddle. And Sophie is helping Michael because he's perplexed by it, right? And she comes up with the idea that they need to catch a shooting star. And this is a moment of like kind of farcical magic to me too, because they go out and they literally chase a falling star, and Michael is able to almost catch it, and then the star turns around and starts talking to him, and it's like really afraid of him, and it's really like emo, and it's just like, I want to die, leave me alone. Yeah. And then like he can't catch it, and it just falls into a puddle and dies.
Yeah, they talk about how sad it is too. Like Sophie says, it's like really sad because it like drowned in the puddle and stuff. And
yeah, but that's what it wanted too. Like apparently the shooting stars are suicidal or something. I don't know. It's pretty funny in like a dark way, but I don't know. I liked it. Yeah. But it's also like this weird, like, it shows you that this isn't our world, right? Like this is a world where shooting stars are it also like unhinges from the firmament and then falls out of the sky. Like, so it's different. It's not like a meteorite, you know?
Yeah. It's cool because they use those boots again, right?
Yeah, that's right, to chase it.
They'd use the boots to chase it because
7 league boots.
7 league boots. They need to travel fast enough to catch a shooting star, so they try to step into it. He tries to step into it and grab it. Yeah,
which just those words put together, right? That's interesting, right there. 7 league boots because you need to travel fast enough to catch a shooting star. That's a good bit of fantasy. Chapter 10, our final chapter. Hal returns, and he mentions that he saw her poking her nose around the house, and it's basically that he saw her at Mrs. Fairfax and knows that she's been snooping. And while this is happening, Hal and Michael both leave again, both to go to their respective leddies. And a knock comes to the door, and Sophie opens it up, and there's a man who wants to buy a spell to stick shoes onto his horse. And so she sells the spell to him. This is the first time where we really see her doing this on her own. And she spends the rest of the day like selling spells to people.
Well, Calcifer is kind of giving her guidance too, because like she wouldn't know on her own. She like walks over to Calcifer, kind of like she doesn't let the customers know, but she asks Calcifer for advice, and he like says like, go grab this, go do that.
That's true. And then there's a boy shows up who wants to win a duel, and she doesn't feel comfortable like giving him like a spell that's going to actually help him win the duel. So she has this funny idea. And she sells him like a packet of cayenne pepper, which she does like fake magic moves over and like words. And she says, this magic dust will make you have a fair chance at winning the fight just as much as your opponent. And he's like super happy with this. And I actually think this is a really funny moment for like how, I don't know, how like a lot of magic is in the real world, like how these spells quote unquote work, you know? It's a lot of this kind of thing. Like if you want to believe in it, then you're going to think it helped you, right?
Right. I mean, it's funny because the powder is like cayenne pepper, right? Or like some sort of
it's just cayenne pepper.
So like maybe I guess in theory, if he threw it just right, it might get in his opponent's eye.
Yeah, but she doesn't say throw it at your opponent. She says just like sprinkle it in the air at the beginning of the fight.
Yeah.
And it'll make it so that you have literally she says it'll make it so you have just as good a chance of winning as your opponent. Which is essentially saying nothing.
And he's like a small guy apparently, and she's like wanted to help him out because he was small, so he's probably gonna get his ass kicked because she wouldn't give him magic stuff.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, so next Howl comes home, and he's all upset about the king, and that he's like pinning him down and trying to get him to do all this stuff for him. And he says, "I really need you to blacken my name to the king." And she's like, resistant at first, but eventually agrees, and Michael's going to go with her. And the plan is for her to pretend to be Hal's mother, and then somehow get the king to continue, like you said earlier, continue to let him make spells for him, but not to make him face the Witch of the Waste. So, yeah, it seems like almost an impossible ask. And then he also says he's going to send her to see his old tutor, Mrs. Penstemon. Penstemon? Yeah. And that's to get used to the grandness of the palace. This is when Michael tells Hal like he's been having a lot of trouble with this spell. And so Hal studies the spell and starts laughing. And then he says, "This isn't the spell I left you." And this is where we learn that he thinks it came through the door when she opened it. And so this is like a mysterious, like the source of the spell is very mysterious.
Yeah.
Like, where did this come from?
When she opened up the black, what was it called? Blob?
Black door.
The black blob.
Black blob.
And she like put her finger in it. Apparently something came through or somebody put something there.
Yeah, it's very mysterious. And Hal says he's very glad that Michael didn't catch the shooting star, and he admits that he once caught one himself. He says, "Oh, this writing isn't a spell, but it's a song, but it's not all there." And so I'm not sure what that all means, but this is when he turns the door to black and he says, "All right, you're gonna follow me anyway, so just come along." And he takes Michael and Sophie out into the nothingness. And as she's leaving, Calcifer tells her that she's had her hint. And somewhere in this conversation, there's the hint about their contract, I guess. And that's the end of chapter 10.
Yeah, so like you say, Calcifer says that she got another hint. Any idea what the hint is?
Do you know what the hint is from the movie?
Yeah.
Okay, you do say I don't remember.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it's the shooting star thing. That's the thing that stands out to me. The fact that he caught one in the past seems to be like, and then he like doesn't elaborate, seems like a hint to me. Something with the shooting star. You don't have to confirm that for me if you don't want to, but that's my guess. What about this spell thing? Does this happen in the movie? Do you remember?
I don't remember the spell. No, I don't think that's really.
So where do you think the spell came from? Is it a person or is it just like an energy? Like what is it?
I mean, if I had to guess, I feel like it has something to do with like the Witch of the Waste, kind of. Maybe like out there is like towards the waist. Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested to see, like, because they just all went through this door now onto this nothingness. And so I'm going to be really curious to see what actually is on the other side of this door.
I just wonder, how is it possible that Calcifer doesn't know what it is at all?
He can't see anything. I don't know. It seems like he doesn't, like, he can't see anything outside of the hearth, right? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's, yeah, and maybe it could be part of his curse that he can't talk about it if he does know anything about it. I don't know. Questions that I have going forward for sure. So yeah, so general thoughts. What did you think of the book version of this? You know, like maybe not necessarily in comparison to the movie, but more just as a reading experience. How is this story striking you?
Coming into this novel, I was like, there's no way that it's going to be anywhere close to as much as I love the film. And I really enjoyed it. Like it's different enough to where I don't feel like I've already seen it, even though I have. And it's just fun. It's like Miyazaki does something special with it in the way that he a lot of his movies are like kind of environmentally friendly and like anti-war or like continuing themes in his films.
Yeah.
And her version of this story, well, the original version of the story, is more just a straight fantasy that's geared towards children because it's like extreme. It's like, it reminded me a lot of reading like a Harry Potter novel. It just feels like a story that you can enter and experience without it needing to have all these like allegories to things that I guess Miyazaki decided to thread in. So that's what I was going to ask you. Did you feel like Diana Wynne Jones was kind of threading in things from her time, from like when she wrote the novel in like the 80s? Did you feel like there were some sort of like allegories to real life?
I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it seems to me that she probably is someone who grew up in a very traditional household. And this feels to me like kind of a subtle way to erode some of these like you're born into a certain life and this is what is like meant for you. And it's not like an all-out assault on that idea, right? Like it could have been. Instead it's like, okay, you know, your parents do generally have the best in mind for you, but maybe there's another way, you know, and we see it through Sophie, and you know, she is granted this like insight from this curse.
I did want to say before I mentioned that I didn't know if I would like the novel quite as much as the film, and I'm enjoying the novel quite a lot so far, like more than I actually expected to, just because the bar is so high for the film.
Yeah, and it's different for me because it's one of those weird situations of seeing the visual medium first and then coming back to a book. Because I'll never have an experience where I read this book and wholly imagined it myself. Like The Moving Castle, I think, is a good example. I can't imagine it any other way than the way that I saw it in the movie. But if you think about what's actually said in the book, it's not like its locomotion is not really described very specifically. So it's kind of left for you to imagine how it actually moves, right? And, other than it having these big turrets or whatever, like, we don't have a clear image of what it looks like. So I don't know. It's a cool experience. It's a unique one. But yeah, like you said, this feels very close to Sophie, and it feels very close to her experience. Whereas, if I can remember the movie, it felt a little bit more wider lens. Like, you can see a little bit more of what's going on in the kingdom and a little bit more of what's going on with Howl early on. Whereas this is very, like, close to Sophie and what she knows. And in fact, it kind of makes me like that moment of, like, omniscient narrator. It kind of makes me like that moment less. Because other than that moment, we're very close third person. And we only know things that she knows, right? So that's an old style thing that, a lot of writers I don't know, 1990s did a lot. So it doesn't shock me to see it here, but.
So do you feel like it was jarring? Like, did you not like that, like, you're saying you wish that it wasn't there? Or?
I mean, honestly, it's handled well. And she's a good writer, and she handles it just fine. And it really didn't take me out of it too much. I think it's just something that's been ingrained in me as a writer, because, the common knowledge now is to pick a method and stick with it. And if you're going to go for close third, like, you've essentially said, okay, these are my rules, and now I'm going to abide by them. And when you do something like that, you're breaking your own rules. So I don't know. It's a modern thing, it's sensibility that maybe people didn't care about as much in the 80s. But nowadays, yeah, you just don't see people doing that as much. Or if they do omniscient, they do, like, you would get a lot more jumping around, and you get a lot more perspectives. All right, I guess that's it for this week. If you'd like to find us on social media, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, at Ink2Film on all three. Or you can tweet at us with the Ink2Film hashtag, and we'll definitely interact with you. I'm very active on those accounts.
Also, if you wanted to send us feedback of any sort on the book or the movie, because we will be covering the movie coming up, you can send that to ink2film@gmail.com. And anything you want to send us, comments, concerns, questions, we might read some of it on the air.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to hear from you, and let us know. Even if you just want to let us know that you're following along, we always love to hear that. Speaking of, if you'd like to help us keep this show going and continue to grow, the best way you can do that is to subscribe on whatever podcast aggregate you use, and leave us a rating and a review. Like this 5-star review from Spatty on iTunes. I really enjoyed this. I constantly debate whether I want to read things, and it's kind of nice to listen to a discussion on a book I'm on the fence about, or maybe never even heard of. Or even hear a discussion on a book I have read and enjoyed it, and to hear a different perspective. We'll definitely be listening to the following episodes. So thanks, Spatty, for that. We love to hear that kind of thing, and every rating really helps us.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that. We also wanted to thank Audible for our affiliate link. If you wanted to get that free 1 credit for a novel and the 30-day free trial, you can go to audibletrial.com/ink2film. And we also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. He has a great YouTube channel with all kinds of copyright-free stuff you can use like this.
Yeah, I mean, he has fantastic content on there, and I was amazed when we thought, oh, what are we going to use for this episode? And sure enough, he has this, like, perfect piece, right? So he's great. Check him out. If you need to use his music for your projects, you can. All right, well, that's going to be it for this week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
See you later.